So I'd like to get started. And again, welcome all of those who have come to join in this special launch event for a new volume being published today entitled Global Education for a Better and More Resilient World. My name is Aaron Benevot. I'm a professor of global education policy in a public university in upstate New York, known as University at Albany. And I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the launch event. We're very pleased to be able to come together today to mark the publication of the fifth volume of the NISSEM Global Briefs series. This series aims to show how themes found in the Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.7 around global citizenship, sustainability, gender equality, peace and nonviolence, and cultural diversity, as well as social emotional learning, can be embedded in educational policies, programs, curricula, materials, and practice. Since the publication of the first volume of the series in 2019, it continues to provide timely overviews of issues involving the inclusion and implementation of Target 4.7 and SEL, especially in under-resourced contexts in the world. The new open access volume, 2 years in the making, is entitled Global Education for a Better and More Resilient World: How Educational Policies, Curriculum, Materials, and Practices Can Help Transform Learning. The new volume is special for many reasons, as we shall hear in just a few moments. My NISSEM colleagues and I are especially delighted with our collaboration with Angel, the academic network on global education and learning, and GENE, the Global Education Network Europe, in the development and finalization of this volume. The idea behind the volume is in some ways quite simple. Can the lofty educational ideals and visions found in politically negotiated texts at the international and regional level shape concrete, relevant, and lasting educational reforms in policy, planning, and practice in diverse contexts around the world? And if so, how to go about doing so? The publication we're launching today focuses on two very timely, recent visionary texts. One is the UNESCO Recommendation on Education for Peace, Human Rights, and Sustainability, which was adopted by all 194 UNESCO member states in 2023 after 2 years of consultations and negotiation. And the other text that is highlighted in the new volume is the European Declaration on Global Education to 2015, which was adopted by representatives of the EU at the Dublin Congress in November 2022. It is meant to be a strategic framework for improving and increasing global education in Europe over the next 25 years. Both of these documents go beyond the articulation of lofty visions of education. They provide detailed guidelines and principles to support a wide array of educational reforms throughout the world. They're embedded in a very comprehensive understanding of education that includes formal, non-formal, and informal education or learning over the course of individual students' lives. They speak to pressing issues of our historical time: devastating wars, newly independent countries, environmental degradation, dramatic shifts in economic livelihoods, waves of migration and displacement, powerful technological innovations, global pandemics, biodiversity loss. They speak to these issues in ways in which education can be formulated to address in a multiplicity of ways these kind of pressing crises and issues. They reference a wide range of subject and substantive forms of education, including peace education, human rights education, development education, ESD, education for sustainability or sustainable development, and all kinds of other cultural and diversity-related education. And yet the question remains, how can we support governments, NGOs, educators, policy analysts, community leaders, practitioners, and students who wish to bring these ideas and principles to fruition? And that, in many ways, is the overall purpose of this new volume. And we I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andy Smart, who was also one of the co-conveners of NISSEM, and he will introduce the panelists for today's launch event. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aaron, and greetings to everybody who's joined us. Happy to see that people are still coming into the room. I'm going to say a few words about NISSEM. I'm Andy Smart. I'm an independent education and publishing consultant. NISSEM is an acronym standing for 3 pillars on which we based the initiative of NISSEM. So Sustainable Development Goal 4.7, as Aaron mentioned, social and emotional learning, and also educational materials. And these 3 pillars are, in a sense, a what and a why and a how in terms of getting from policy through to practice. And when we in NISSEM talk about the how, we recognize the influence of educational materials, and especially textbooks, in shaping what happens in so many classrooms around the world. So NISSEM is about policy and practice, both in terms of our focus areas, but also in the form of our individual co-conveners, including Aaron and myself. And it's why the new volume of NISSEM Global Briefs is divided into 2 parts. First is about policy in terms of international agreements and declarations, while the second is about implementation. And we're very pleased to welcome today our 3 key speakers who will speak about these twin themes of policy and practice. First, we have Andreas Schleicher, who for many years has served as Director for Education and Skills at OECD. Andreas will be followed by Wray from ThinkShow, which works with schools, organizations, and communities in South Africa. And then by Wendy Morel from Humboldt University and the Handprint Initiative, which works with educators to develop key competencies for sustainability. And Wendy, along with my fellow NISSEM co-convener Susan Iannuzzi, the 3 of us contributed a paper to the volume which looks at specific examples of teaching and learning materials which advance the aims of the 2023 recommendation. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Andreas Schleicher. Andreas, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Aaron and Andy, also for your leadership in this really, really important area. And I want to start with something that's pretty obvious. I mean, we have seen how vulnerable our education systems are, even to mild disruptions, like the pandemic, and the future will always surprise us. Climate change is going to disrupt our lives a lot more than the pandemic, and artificial intelligence these days is putting to a test almost anything we take for granted. And you can put in endless numbers of disruptors into this question. I mean, when you look at a chart like this, you just understand why sustainability, but also resilience, have become such important and powerful objectives of education. And in fact, maybe even more obvious than when, SDG 4.7 was actually drafted. Last summer, we did something really interesting. Together with the First Lady of Ukraine, we asked young people, 14 to 18-year-olds in 15 countries, about what knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values they think they will need for their future. I'm not saying we should only teach, what young people think is important to them, but it's certainly an important perspective to look at, how the next generation sees their future. And this is the answer. The kind of things that dominate today's school curricula are actually at the bottom. The number 1 was critical thinking, the capacity of young people to navigate ambiguity, to, reconcile conflicting issues, their dilemmas, and so on. And then social skills came a clear second, working with others, living with people who are different from me. And third came self-awareness, respect for others, and then the ability to, express myself. You look at this list and you can see, well, if young people had to say, our education systems would probably look very, very differently. And what's so interesting, when you ask employers these days what skills do matter for them, they actually come up with a quite similar list, also a list that is quite different from what we do currently in education. So what we try to do at the OECD is to measure some of those outcomes. I know it's very hard, it's very controversial, but what we measure is where we will place our attention. And where our attention is, we're going to see action. So, we do our best to make those outcomes visible. I'll give you an example. Take a country like Japan. It always tops international comparisons of academic achievement. In the OECD area, you find them, number one in mathematics and science, and so on. But, remember that is only a part of the list that we just saw. Now, if you look beyond that surface, you can see the Japanese still have a lot of homework to do. You can see, psychological strengths, the orange part. It's not that well developed, well below the blue dot, which is the OECD average. Agency. You want young people to be able not just to, learn things, but to mobilize their cognitive, social, and emotional resources, to do things, to take initiative, to take action, to be entrepreneurial. And you can see the dark green bar is quite short. Emotional resilience. Now, can you reinvent yourself when the world around you changes? So incredibly important. And we can see in the mental health of young people how the kind of pressures are really piling up, that emotional resilience. You can see in a traditionally very successful system like Japan has still lots of room for improvement in many other areas once you start to make them visible. Let me bring you to the other end of the world. You take a country like Peru. It's almost the mirror image. And you can see the Peruvians' real struggle with mathematics, with reading, and so on. But we shouldn't underestimate some of the skills that Peruvian 15-year-olds have developed, at least when they were assessed in PISA. You could see, despite all the difficulties they faced, they had a great, psychological strengths. They knew who they are. They were able to reflect on themselves. They showed a great level of agency, doing things, a good level of emotional resilience, strong social relationships, the quality of relationships among them with their teachers. And look at the last part. They were open to different views and perspectives, to different ways of thinking, to other cultures. So you suddenly see, different educational efforts have different strengths. And now you ask yourself, either you're like the Japanese, you push kids hard academically, then you lose out on other things, or you're like the Peruvians, you focus on, student social emotional skills and you compromise academic achievement. But, there are systems that are pretty good at reconciling this. You look at Danish kids, they score almost high on everything that we measured. So we should no longer see, cognitive, social, emotional skills as alternatives or opposing ends on a spectrum. We should think harder how we can reconcile them. And, when we studied adults, we looked at the workforce in OECD countries. You could see actually some of those other things were actually highly predictive for our success in life. Here, look at employment, extroversion, emotional stability, were as good predictors for being employed than your literacy skills or, your propensity to volunteering, openness, very, very important kind of predictors. Or so there are lots of things that actually we can see really matters. Now, let's bring that to education. When we ask, agenda 4.7, to what extent are global issues covered in the curriculum? We surveyed school leaders and they say, yeah, we all already do that. Climate change, global warming, 9 out of 10 school leaders in OECD countries say, yep, already covered in the curriculum. But then, when you look back and survey students, you get a very different answer to that. They say on the one hand, looking after the global environment is really urgent, is really important to me. But when you ask them, can you do something about it? Or, do you think what you're going to do is going to matter for people in other parts of the world? You see these bars are getting much shorter. And that again highlights, we do lots of things in abstract ways. We teach students lots of stuff. But when it comes to, making that real, taking action, building agency, our education systems are really struggling, with the exception of a few. And I want to look at that, last part, that openness to global issues, to diversity, in a bit more detail. And that's been the core of my chapter as well. Now, we studied, to what extent young people can examine local, global, and international and intercultural issues. If you drink a cup of coffee in Paris, do you understand that could have implications for, how people in Brazil live? So those kinds of interconnections we wanted to understand. We wanted to see to what extent young people understand and appreciate different worldviews, different perspectives. That's so important today because technology is pushing you in the opposite direction, connecting you with people who think like you and look like you, walk like you. We wanted to see to what extent they also not just, understand it, but are willing to engage in interaction across cultures, and then finally, taking initiative, taking action. We built a test around it. That's the OECD. We're always trying to measure things. And, this is a reminder on the right side how the PISA countries came up when we looked at, in this case, mathematics. But when we looked at global competency, we got a quite different list, conditional on the PISA scores. Students in Colombia, who you wouldn't have normally on the map, in academic outcomes, they don't do quite well. But, for more than a decade, they have really put global competency at the core, and reconciliation and peace education. That's been actually a big part of, schools' effort. And you can see it does pay off. Canada, good on traditional PISA tests, but even better when it comes to global competency. Also because, Canadian schools have always valued those kinds of outcomes. I mentioned already Colombia, and a below average performer on the academics, doing quite well on global competency. A traditional high performer like Korea, students really struggle with taking a global perspective because they don't see that in school. Let's have a look a little bit in more detail on this. To what extent can young people understand and appreciate, different worldviews? Now, we measured something that we call cognitive resilience. Now, and you can see sort of most people say, on average, yeah, I can change my behavior when things change and new situations arrive. But, when it comes to cultural openness, I can adapt easily to a new culture, or I can adapt to different situations. Those bars get shorter. And when we found in analyzing those data, that kind of perspective taking, your ability to appreciate different ways of thinking, to be open to cultures, has a huge influence on your respect for people from other culture. And those, that mirrors then in, for example, the attitudes to immigrants in our data. It also reflects on your cognitive adaptability. That's related to creative thinking, for example. It relates to your interest in learning about other cultures and so on. So we can see those kinds of interconnections. I don't have much time, but I want to just, illustrate a couple of examples. The first is, language learning. When you think about language learning, you think, about communication. And, countries place very different efforts on that. There is sort of countries that, don't do any of that, largely English-speaking countries. Then, countries where students learn one language, and then some where actually this is a big issue. And you can say, okay, those who speak more languages can communicate in more languages. But our data found beyond that, if you speak 2 or more languages, that is actually a pretty good predictor for your respect and openness to other cultures. So language, not just as a communication vehicle, but really as a tool that opens minds, that, makes people reflect on other ways of speaking, other kinds of cultures. The second example I wanted to show you is about, school education. To what extent do we teach young people about other cultures? And you'll respond, yeah, we have social studies, we have history, we need lots of things on that. And yeah, about, on average across OECD countries, you have almost 9 out of 10 school leaders who say, in our schools, students learn about different cultural perspectives on historical, social events, things like this. So yeah, we teach about those things. But, when you look at what are you actually doing in your culture? For example, in our school, we celebrate cultural festivities from different cultures. you can see that bar gets really, really short. Of course, there's always huge variability across countries. And you can see, for example, yes, in Singapore, in Panama, in Brazil, in Moldova, there's a lot of emphasis on celebrating, different cultural festivities. But, you look to Italy, you look to Switzerland, Saudi Arabia, that's, Korea, Iceland, that's very, very rare. So does it matter? Well, actually, and this brings us back to where I started, and I promise this is also my last slide. What you do at school, the number of learning activities actually are a strong predictor for students' attitudes to global culture, to global competency. And those attitudes, in turn, are an important predictor for the outcome. Now, where you can see that students say, I'm interested in learning, the more activities a school does, the more likely students say, I'm interested in learning about other cultures. It's not, what you study. It's not what your teachers tells you, but the more you are exposed firsthand to those kinds of experiences, the more you are interested in them, the greater your awareness of global issues. Once again, it doesn't come from teachers teaching you about climate change. It comes from being engaged in experience of things. Your agency regarding global issues is greater. Your self-efficacy, again, your cognitive resilience or adaptability, your capacity to take different perspectives, your awareness of intercultural communication, and your respect for people from other cultures. Now, what we do in school has thus a huge influence on the worldview that young people have towards the world. And those views are then reflected in the competencies that we measure. And with this, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas. And to all the participants, I just remind you that the chapter by Andreas is in the volume, which is available, and the link has been placed in the chat. So without further ado, I want to ask our second speaker, which is Dylan, to step up, please. Dylan, over to you.
So, yeah, I'm here back in South Africa. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about what I contributed to this global brief, and really it started from some conversations I had with some teachers in various parts of the world. I do a lot of work for an organization called ABCU, which is part of UNESCO in Korea, and the benefit of that is it brings me in touch with lots of educators from all over the world. And one of the teachers that I happened to meet is a woman called Sari Ayu Magdalena. And I just want to quickly read. We're having a conversation and doing some research around the early impact of artificial intelligence in her teaching. And she said, I remember it well, because when ChatGPT 3.5, I mean, it just feels like years ago, was the most advanced version. I asked my students to write an essay about science, specifically about the embryo development. I told them they could gather information from various sources as long as those sources were valid. One of my grade 5 students submitted an essay. The content was correct, but at the top it included a note saying this essay was made by GPT. Back then, ChatGPT would sometimes add those disclaimers. I asked if she had used ChatGPT and she admitted it. She explained, I didn't cheat on my friends and I put effort in to use ChatGPT as a tool. Isn't that valid effort? And when I spoke to Sari, this was an important moment for her, because she realized that at that early stage, the student wasn't looking to cheat with the tool. It was more, here is a media tool that is available, and she thought if she's going to work with it to improve her work. And one thing what Sari said is that it showed her that although she had said you can use ChatGPT in the class, she hadn't actually given the students the instructions of the how. And as Sari admitted, because she was still learning as well, as we all are. Another teacher I spoke to teaches in Kazakhstan. He's an Indian teacher, and he teaches media and information literacy. And he said, I have more concerns than excitement. I recently started teaching English to grade 7 students, and our policy students in grade 7 can bring them mobile phones. When I talk to them, I see that they often use ChatGPT just to answer me. I'm definitely concerned that it's affecting their learning, critical thinking, creativity, and more. So yes, it's a concern for me. So Shandan was also coming from a different point of view. Just to be fair, Shandan is also very supportive of what can be done with AI. But both of them were raised this issue that there is a support that they didn't have as educators. Now we'll go into that starting to shift and change in the world. So that got me started to look at. I've been doing some work on media and information literacy for a while, and had been creating AI tools and been doing more work on AI. And it got me to think about, well, how do these two worlds come together? And so I started by really focusing on the mostly UNESCO documents, just because a lot of work has gone into them. They are widely distributed. And with a document like this one on media and information literacy, it's been around for a while and sets a really good standard of how media and information literacy can work. So for those who don't know, just very briefly, if you were going through this document, in a media information literacy class, things like the creation, access, and distribution of media, that's what children are spending their time on. And crucially, how that all impacts them, us, I suppose. They look at ethical considerations in access to media, in sharing, and then, of course, they develop the skills to communicate using various media platforms. And various studies, which I included in my piece, in my article, have shown that media information literacy can work. So this is just one study in 2023. There have been many studies, but this one particularly, and I think this is relevant to what Andreas was showing in one of his earlier slides, was that when students who had high levels of media literacy, i.e. they were actually consciously taught it and were developing critical thinking through media information literacy and other subjects, they were significantly better at detecting fake news on social media. And there were some other studies that followed that, which also showed that when students were actually given assignments to learn how to create fake news, not to distribute it, just to understand the tools that are at play, they actually were better at detecting fake news as well. So media information literacy was really important, but also combined with critical thinking. So MAIIL has kind of created this really good foundation for which we can begin to move into an AI-dominated world. But there is a need for some of the MAIIL skills to really be amplified and probably refashioned. So this example that I speak about is that, before AI, students were learning to check if a website is, or a news source was credible. Look at the author, the source's publication date. All these things we've been doing for many years and they work. Now students also have to do a lot of that, if that's where they're getting their AI content from. But now they also have to be able to learn the skills of verifying AI-generated images, videos, and text, and tools to detect deepfakes and AI misinformation. So some of the skills that they have at MAIIL are already foundational, can be used, but there's some new things that have to be developed. And so I then turned to the artificial intelligence literacy publications. I focused a lot on this particular one, AI competency framework for students, because it gives a basic understanding of AI. The approach is a very human-centered approach to AI. There's much like with MAIIL, which I spoke about, there's an important focus on the ethical awareness of AI, critically evaluating AI, responsible creation, adaptive learning. So even just looking at that screen and knowing a little bit about what I said about media and information literacy, these two worlds are, they're magnetic. We're drawing together. And at that time, there was nothing that was really, locking them in place. And so I then thought, okay, well, let me take the literature that UNESCO has on media information literacy. Let me take these new AI competency frameworks and really let me try and bring them together. Because it's very difficult to navigate this media world that we live in, especially because the AI systems are creating a lot of that content and distributing as well. And so, and sorry, just to quote her just one more time. one of the other things she said, which really struck me, is she says, when it comes to AI-generated content, things are getting more spicy. And I think the spicy summed up exactly what it is. I would probably argue it's a bit more spicy it's a bit more than spicy now. And AI is making things more advanced and complicated. It's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish between real and AI-generated content. And this was probably a year ago she was making that comment. Now the tools are, as we know, they're just way ahead. So it's definitely more than spicy. Now, for many countries, there is not an immediate possibility of introducing a new subject called AI literacy. Some countries are working on it. Some countries are already training, already educating their students in AI literacy from a young age. But the reality for most countries, students and teachers are still using AI. Systemic curriculum change takes a very long time. Setting up a whole brand new subject and training teachers and getting resources, that becomes a difficulty. And so I started to think about this idea that MAIIL, which is already in a number of curricula across the world, could become a temporary home for AI literacy. And so then I pulled these things together to develop what's called the MAIIL framework, Media, Artificial Intelligence, and Information Literacy. And it's not there to replace existing curricula on media information literacy or now on AI literacy, but really to show that if you're currently teaching media information literacy, if it's in the curriculum, there are ways that you can bring in artificial intelligence, drawing on these very important frameworks. I'm just making sure of my time. So what I did, I'll tell you quickly, is I went through these two documents with a lot of AI help. And so to tell you just very briefly, in full transparency, because that's an important part of working with AI, is I used AI tools. It was a year ago. Tools were very different to how they are now. But my process was really using 3 different platforms: Claude AI, ChatGPT, and then Notebook LM, each to be able to go through documents, to be able to find or validate particular matches that I found, or connections that I found, activities that could be transferable. But it was very important for me to be able to enter this with, I have some ideas, I have some thoughts about these, check those, get AI to help do some of the hard research work, but then importantly to get 3 different tools to check each other. And so eventually, using these tools, I came up with a bunch of pairings, which I felt that could work. I'm just going to show you this and just show one, and then I will probably be shut down. So if you see this, the boxes in blue are the media and information literacy ones, and the other ones are the artificial intelligence competencies from the UNESCO document. And so if I look at the first one, in media information literacy, as children understand the role of information media and digital communications and sustainable development and democracy. And that matched very nicely with the AI competency of human-centered mindset, because both of them speak about the importance of the human, either as the creator and the recipient and the person that is, the people who are affected by both media and AI. And so these were just a natural fit. The same with critically evaluating information and information sources and ethical practices. That's a big part of media information literacy. And it's the ethics of AI around access and transparency and various other things. That made a really powerful match. And so there were other matches that I was able to do. So that was the first step that took a while to do. And then eventually came up with this combination. And this is just one screenshot of just one. But this combined media information literacy and AI literacy around system design and promoting MAIIL, I was able to then use the UNESCO's way of, I guess they're in their framework, where they take students through an understand phase, so really understand what's going on, then apply that knowledge, and then crucially to create. And that fitted really well, because media information literacy there's a lot of understanding, there's a lot of applying it, and then there is, and you're also a creator, and there's work around creation. So the UNESCO's framework on AI really helped to be able to give that a platform. And then what I was able to do was to, again, with AI help, was to pull out important things around understanding from both frameworks and other documents that UNESCO has on media information literacy, to be able to give teachers and policymakers an idea of what you need to do to understand, what does children need to do when they're understanding, what they need to do when they're applying, and when they're creating. And just before I finish, I just want to focus on just one, which just shows the powerful link. So I mentioned that media information literacy is around critically evaluating information sources, and ethics of AI. And so in a media information literacy classroom or curriculum, students, they assess whether information is reliable, accurate, responsibly presented. Now, those same skills you need in AI work. And then in ethics of AI competency, the students consider principles of fairness, non-discrimination, doing no harm in terms of guiding the AI development use. And so when we kind of combine those two, they extend their existing evaluation skills, which they get from media information literacy, into these new contexts. So that student can now, who was able to spot bias in a news article, can use those same skills to begin to identify bias in an algorithm and at least be thinking about the bias that exists. And the same way that they would cite sources and can understand why it's important not only to ask for sources, but to present the sources and be transparent. That is needed now in AI, and crucially even more so now in AI, the issue of transparency. So I'm gonna pause there. But just one thing is around the next steps where this has gone to. So this can be this whole framework will be accessed in various places now. Obviously, it's in the NISSEM chapter, so you can get it there. But we've just recently set up an online learning platform called ThinkShow. It's at thinkshow.learnworlds.com, and we've developed a lot of kind of this thinking into what's called the I model for working with AI, and that was drawn a lot from media information literacy as well, where we focus on inquiry, intentionality, integrity, and intuition. And when you bring those four behaviors and habits, we can work better with all information, but very specifically with AI. So you'll be able to find some more information, and in a few weeks' time, in a month's time, you'll be able to have a course that you can take for free on thinkshow.learnworlds.com on this MAIIL framework and how to bring that into practice. So I'll pause there. Sorry if I went over time.
Thanks so much, Dylan. Yeah, you squeezed a lot into that time anyway. And I'm interested, particularly as a textbook person, primarily working textbooks, how we address issues around media literacy, particularly also AI, in a classroom which is dominated by a government-approved or government-published textbook. And that's one of the things that appears in the chapter that Wendy and I and Susan Iannuzzi have co-written. So it's my pleasure to ask Wendy to speak next. And Wendy's going to speak to the chapter, particularly from her own contribution, but I think she's going to reference some of the contributions of Susan and myself.
My name is Wendy Morel. I'm from Mexico, but currently I'm based in Berlin. I'm a fellow researcher in the Humboldt University, and I also work with the Handprint Initiative. That was the way that I met Andy in 2024, and I think it's important to comment this, that we were in this conference and we were talking about how can we change the education to be a relevant education that students can cope with the current global challenges. And one of the discussions is that are we producing textbooks that are trying to help the students to cope with these global challenges? And in that discussion, a lot of people will say, well, we need to first change the curriculum and then we talk about the textbooks. And we will say, no, actually, we can do both ways. We can work with the textbooks in a way that support the teachers to cope with the global challenges, so to develop the competencies to cope with the global challenges. Why? Because And that's where I was invited by Andy and to work with Susan to make this project that is a path through the curriculum forest, how textbooks can provide a route from complexity to clarity. Because if we think about the textbooks and how they work inside the education, we can think about like a forest. I really like that metaphor that there are different elements. And depending on the context for example, in countries, in developing countries, you can figure out that the textbooks can be like this important thing for the teacher to support the class. Or for other people, textbooks is just something that stops the class. So we have these different situations. But currently, what we have heard, and Andreas was talking about attitudes, and we were talking about the information that we are reliable right now, or all the information that's available. If we think about it, actually, in education, in the way that we are addressing education and the global challenges, is always in the negative aspects, with a negative impact. The way that we have been teaching for the last 100 years is that all the students, even if you think about your own education when you were kids, you will say that we will say, or we have the information that the world is about to end and it's your fault. Because we are killing the planet, we are not having any more planet in the future. And then if you think about it, it's like we are not able to take humanity from the equation from the environment. It's actually the question will be what kind of relationship have we developed with the environment and what kind of relationship we want to the future. So going with this idea is that we talk, for example, about the concept of the handprint. Instead of talking about the negative impact that we have for the environment, let's start talking about what are the positive actions that we can come up and do for the better future, for a common future. And that's when also come into the question, the UNESCO framework and also the different frameworks about which competencies, which knowledge, which skills do the students, teachers, and all of us have to develop to take actions. And that's when we have to talk about the competencies, for example, for system thinking, to critical thinking, to work in collaboration, to be self-awareness, to be able to develop strategies, to see the different scenarios from the future. All these competencies with the knowledge and being able to analyze the knowledge is what we will allow us to come up to solutions for, tackle climate change or to tackle all the horrible things that are happening right now in our world. So with that background, with Andy and with Susan, we say, okay, do we have examples already about textbooks that actually are trying to support, for example, the cultural values from depending on the context? We are talking about developing competencies or also a way to address the 21st competency skills or to talk about the second language. What are the examples that we can find? And in this article that we worked together, we come up with 3 different study cases, because I think that when we talk about textbooks are really a good support and tool for the teachers and for the students. From one side, one of the things that is important is that in a middle ground about our views about textbooks and the importance to develop a class is that we'll support the development from knowledge and competencies in students and also can do it for the teachers. And one example that we have of one of the case studies is the one from Toga in the Polynesian Islands. And this is one of the examples that they're trying to make a scope and a different sequence for teaching and learning materials from different subjects. And one of the subjects was the Toga language. Was for the 5th and the 6th grade in that moment. And what is really important for this example, it was a cross-cutting example from going for skills, but also taking in consideration the cultural values from the Polynesian. So in some way, what this material, these textbooks was using as a background is also to tackle values from the students and interesting. So they are trying to figure out, the work was to understand the interest from the students, talk about the values from the context, and then tackle this information. How can we talk about process, or how can we go against the disinformation and use it as a tool to learn something? That was one of the examples that we use in our case study. The second one that we used was the one that Susan explained. It was about from India, which actually this material is also an example that not all the textbooks have to be specifically done for the curriculum. There is also material that can be, or textbooks that can be developed as a material outside of the mainstream curriculum. And this example from these textbooks was based on the story of Jyoti Singh, a 23-year-old girl who was raped. And from that situation, she come up for this bad situation to resilience, to recover, and actually to start talking, how can we change our Indian society? And they're trying, they create these different books to tell different stories, to talk about resilience, to talk about the change in the Indian society, but they also were tackling, for example, environmental topics. So they're using this kind of material, this textbook, to use the English language skills. And also, this is a good example that when we talk about that we need to create textbooks, they are well created and they are in connection with the syllable and also in connection with the curriculum. And when you structure the textbooks in a way that they have an organized approach, that design is well organized and give a sequence for the students and the teachers, actually you can develop this critical thinking. In this case, the stories from Priya, the superhero Priya, is also based, for example, in images and how can you develop these images to critical thinking in different steps using the English as a tool or as a main to go in that direction. And finally, the third case study, it was the one from Mexico, that actually the material was not developed specifically for Mexico. It was a material that was developed in an international context, considering the context from India, Germany, South Africa, and Mexico. And the idea was, how can we create a material with a global perspective that can be used in a local context to develop system thinking? So this material, what they're trying, or the objective for this material was to use daily examples like potato chips or the jeans and explain how that element in your daily life is part of a system and understand which are those elements in the system and how the movement or the goals or the purpose of these elements can turn the purpose of the system. And what is your role when you are talking or you are inside that system? In a way that when the students go to the different activities, when they arrive to the 10 steps, they not only develop a system thinking competency, but they also develop the other 7 competencies or key competencies for sustainable development, critical thinking, self-awareness, I forgot the name, when you can develop different scenarios, when you have a competency for creating strategy and solving problems. So quickly, because the time is going really fast, when we work with this material, we realize that to create a relevant education and to create textbooks that actually support this change in education for students, we need to have textbooks that are organized, they have this approach that is organized, they were well designed, that they have these pedagogical different methodologies that can help the students and the teacher to develop the competencies. We need to have clear awareness about the social cultural context, and that should be expressed through the different pedagogics in the book. And also, it's important to responding to a positive response to the social and global challenges. We need to change the way that we are seeing things because, every time that we see bad things, at the end, you could have 2 different responses. The first one is to say, I don't want to have a dark future. I would like to have a better future. Or you will say, well, everything is lost, so let's just enjoy what is happening right now. With that to say, I hope I was just trying to cut in. I will say, please take a look. I think it is important so we can develop more ideas to support the change of education in a way that is a relevant education for the current situations. And thank you so much from Andy, Susan, and me.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And what a great way to finish the 3 presentations. I would like to emphasize what you were talking about in terms of hope. If you pick up the volume and start from the beginning, you'll see a very powerful foreword by Liam Wedgmont, which talks about hope in a very striking way. And I think the introduction conversation between Douglas Bourne, Margaret, Aaron, and myself as editors of the volume also stresses that hope is the thing that we hang everything on, especially in the current times. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Elina Lehtomäki, I hope I've got your name pronounced right, Elina from University of Oulu, who's going to offer some thoughts and perhaps some questions. And then after that, there'll be Anna Larcher from Gene. And I should add that Elina is currently chair of the Angel Network. Elina, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope you can hear me clearly. And thank you for inviting me to have some words in this exciting event, the NISSEM Policy Brief, Global Policy Briefs event. And thank you for the excellent sort of briefs that you gave us all today. And I think it was fascinating to see could we say, from more sort of frameworks, where we go from frameworks, where you go from policies towards the practice, all the way to the text materials. And I hope this will inspire teacher education institutions as well around the world. We had questions in the chat concerning diverse contexts, and I think the last presentation, Wendy, thank you for that. I think you succeeded very well also to bring the discussion also to where we also work in context with less resources. And these were some of the questions I observed in the chat, and I would have asked myself as well, what do we mean and how do we work on this? And I think when it comes to connecting policy and practice, something I would like to bring representing the Academic Network of Global Educational Learning, our research network, would be also the role of research in all this. And you all have referred to research, including Dylan and Aaron already right from the beginning. So I think we do have all these issues there. And I think these policy briefs, like what we heard today, including AI and the use of AI, media and information literacy, when it comes to understanding the context relevance of different things, I think we can find a lot of sort of tools and ways to support global engagement, understanding of the world. And I think coming from the comparative perspective that Andreas represented, and of course on the behalf of OECD, that's what OECD does, all this comparative research comparing countries and contexts. And I think from there, when we then move towards textbooks and thinking about textbooks and AI tools, artificial intelligence, resilience are themes we study in this University of Oulu. And very much technology and education, but also resilience as a systems thinking. And I think connecting micro level, like textbooks, to bigger level, macro level, I think this is when we go towards systems thinking, that we look at all these different contributors. And I hope that from these policy brief sessions, we also all get inspired and find new gaps in research, because this is what essentially our work when it comes to research network. And we would like to, I think, as Angel, also bring the research perspectives and welcome also ideas what research we do need for the future. Because future is something I hope we find a sort of collaborative level as well, in addition to individuals, students who need to do. And I think the systems level thinking was there very clearly. And this is something we consider very important in resilience research, which is transdisciplinary and not only focusing on individual resilience, but also collective resilience and education, resilient education systems. And we did not hear something from teacher education, but NISSEM policy briefs will include those as well. So I think I would like to welcome everybody also to get familiar with the volume that is now published and launched. And you find the link over there.
Thanks, Elina. Any other thoughts from you, Elina, or shall I ask Anna to?
I think I'll hand over to Anna. Yes, please.
Anna, yeah, good. Anna, over to you, please. Anna Larcher from the Global Education Network Europe. Jean.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon from my part of the world. It's the afternoon here. So I will be speaking here from the genes perspective, and I would like to highlight why for us this work and this publication feels really important. So I just begin by briefly referring to the European Declaration on Global Education to 2050, which we also call the Dublin Declaration. And this is the policy foundation for our work, and you will find several reflections about it in this NISSEM volume. And this declaration, as Andy mentioned, was adopted in 2022, and it was the result of a process led by policymakers and facilitated by GEAN, the European network of ministries and agencies that are responsible for global education. And as usual with the work of GEAN, the process worked from the national experience to a shared European vision. And it engaged civil society, local and regional authorities, researchers, and also partners from different regions of the world. We also worked in close dialogue with international organizations, and in that way, this declaration is also fully coherent and aligned with the UNESCO Recommendation on Peace, Human Rights, and Sustainable Development, and other key frameworks in global education. So this brings me to my key point today, that is this highly participatory process gave rise to what we think is a shared vision and definition of global education. And this definition includes a number of core elements, but at the heart of it are shared values: social justice, peace, equality, solidarity, the respect for human rights, the embracing of diversity, inclusion, international understanding, and planetary sustainability. And we are living in a moment when these shared values are openly under attack. The rule of law, democracy, social and human rights, society, cohesion, trust are all under systematic attack. So we firmly believe that we need global education now more than ever. And to safeguard these shared values, as was mentioned already by previous speakers, we need hope and we need global education. And hope is really the main thread that runs through this volume, not naive hope, but critical hope, a hope that recognizes the harsh realities, but refuses to accept them as inevitable. So as Paulo Freire writes, and I quote, "I do not understand human existence and the struggle needed to improve it, apart from hope and dream." But he also adds that one of the tasks of the progressive educator, through a serious, correct political analysis, is to unveil opportunities for hope, no matter what the obstacles may be. Importantly, he also said that without struggle, hope dissipates and turns into hopelessness, and hence the need for an education in hope. And this is a lot of our vision for education, an education that opens up possibilities of people to transform the world towards greater justice, equality, and sustainability, and counter current trends towards authoritarianism, violence, and discrimination. An education that enables people to think critically, to question power, and to act responsibly, collectively, and for human values. This is the kind of education that can bring the world back to a better path. And we believe that this is why this book is important at this time. But given the scale of the threats that we face, we need also now more than ever to unite. The forces that challenge our values are loud, powerful, and violent, but they are not the majority, and there are many of us, as we can see here today. So what is needed is to unite and to organize collective work. And we want to organize this collective action by building on the commonalities across these various policy frameworks in global education. And as we've seen, they are broad and they are deep, as you can read about in this publication. They are rooted in long-standing international commitments, such as the UNESCO Recommendation, building on decades of work on education for sustainability, for sustainable development, on global citizenship education, and also on strong traditions of human rights education, intercultural education, education for democracy, anti-racist education, among others. So we are committed to bringing these various educations for a better world into dialogue, to show that our efforts are connected, that they reinforce each other, and that together they form a coherent and powerful educational vision, and that they are a powerful force to transform the world. So this publication for us is really a part of this effort to unite and organize across policy. And uniting is also about bringing together the actors that make policy alive. Policy is crucial. It signals political commitment, also shared values, and creates space for action. But policies only come alive when they are taken up, debated, questioned, adapted at national and local levels through national policy, through curricula, teacher education, assessment, and textbooks. So through the work of teachers, of students, of school leaders, of parents, of the wider educational communities, and of researchers, which play a crucial role helping us reflect, question, and learn from practice. So we are really delighted to engage with this publication because it is really about uniting across policy, across different levels, and across actors. So I would just like to end with some words of thanks. First to NISSEM for inviting Jean for this collaboration, and to Angel for supporting the process throughout. Thank you to all the authors, and in particular to the speakers here today, who took the time to reflect and to engage seriously in dialogue, to share with us needed evidence for our work, to share tools, to share resources. And thank you all for being here today and for believing in education as a force to change the world towards greater justice and equality. This publication is part of a much wider process. We are aware of that builds on decades of work in global education, that is part of a broader movement to defend fundamental values and to work for change through education. But we know that it is needed more than ever. And a colleague in the field just recently wrote, global education shouldn't feel radical, but now it does, because it stands firmly in the defense of our fundamental values. So at its heart, this work is really about bringing together all those that believe in education that enables people to think critically and act justly, that helps recognize and fight against the deep causes of injustice, to become protectors of values and of communities and of people. And also, as Giroux says, an education with the power and the potential of collective resistance. So our hope and our belief for this publication is that it helps us carry forward this vision of an education that can shift the world to a better path. And it encourages us to reach out and work together to amplify our shared power. And I end just drawing inspiration from the words of Martin Luther King, whose words still call on us today to remember our responsibilities in the ongoing fight for justice, to organize, to mobilize, to believe, no matter how far away the mountaintop might feel, it is in our capacity to change our communities, our countries, and, if I may add, our world as well, for the better. So thank you very much all, and we look forward to continuing working together with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And with that, we conclude. And I want to thank everybody who has spent the past hour and a quarter with us, as well as the contributors and the organizers and those who helped this webinar to come to fruition. So thank you very much, and goodbye.